Hi, this is Dan Gilbazan, and you're listening to the Geekcast Radio Network.
Hey, it's your friendly neighborhood Spider-Man here, and I'm swinging by the Geekcast Radio Network.
You've just jumped inside the pull bag. Join TFG1 Mike and the rest of the comic reading crew here at the GCRN as they make their great escape into comics. From DC, Marvel, IDW, Boom Studios, Zenoscope, and more, we have everything you want to read right here. Transformers comics? Yeah, we cover that. He-Man? Yeah, sure. DC superheroes like Batman, Batgirl, Nightwing, and Batman Beyond? Yep, we have those too. How about TMNT from IDW and I Hate Fairyland from Image Comics? Yeah, we have all that here. Plus, so much more. It's all inside the pull bag here on the Geekcast Radio Network. So without any further ado, it's time to talk about the comics we are reading right now here inside the pull bag.
Hello and welcome to The Pull Bag. This is episode 334. Folks, we took some time off for the holidays and things like that, and things are just stressing me out and everything else. But we are recording and releasing this on December 26th, 2018, Boxing Day. What the hell is Boxing Day? It's a Canadian thing, folks. Go find out about it. There's a whole bunch of after Christmas deals. It's like, Halloween candy on sale November 1st. Joining me, of course, is Ryan, the Uneven Flow Merkley. Hello, sir.
Shouldn't I be explaining the Canada stuff?
Sure. Go ahead.
No.
Come on.
I don't know what origins are. Speaking of origins.
I know, right? Ladies and gentlemen, we are going to be covering something in this episode that I have never, ever read before. In the 5.5, almost 6 years that the podcast has been online, I've said many times that my comic reading did not really take off until right before the podcast launched. I had read comics as a kid in the 80s and 90s, but I was more into watching the stuff with Batman the Animated Series and Spider-Man and X-Men and to a lesser extent Iron Man and the Hulk and the Fantastic Four and all that, but I maybe picked up a Marvel comic here or there in the 90s, but we are going to be covering Amazing Fantasy 15, the debut of Spider-Man in August of 1962. I assume with everything that you read that you've read this before.
I've reprinted a few different times. The Essentials set for Spider-Man, which it's in there. It was reprinted in Ultimate Spider-Man, one of the hardcover collections I've got of that. I know I've got it other places. It's been reprinted a bunch of times in trades that I have.
Yeah. And kind of the main reason why I wanted to cover this now is because we're going to be doing a lot more Spider stuff here soon. We've covered Dan Slott's Spider-Man run every now and then. Actually, we've covered Dan Slott's Spider-Man run every time it ends.
All of this is really timely.
Yeah.
With Into the Spider-Verse in theaters now, too, which is a love letter to... So Slott came up with the sort of Spider-Verse concept, although it's sort of kicked around before then as well, too, but he was the one that kind of popularized it, and they use sort of similar concepts in the movie, but also it's good timing to do the origins just because Into the Spider-Verse was a love letter to all of that, to comic books in general as well, but heavily to Stan Lee and Steve Ditko, and it's proof of it serves as proof of how well Spider-Man's origins have held up over the years, as they're reused heavily for Miles' story and edited somewhat, but it's pretty much the same sort of story, and they did it so tastefully and everything else that Miles pretty much instantly became a fan favorite character, and the movie does a great job with all of that as well too. Go see it if anyone listening to this hasn't. I highly recommend it.
Yeah, the end of 2018, folks, or actually almost all of 2018, it's kind of been the year of Spider-Man. You had the PS4 video game come out.
I thought you were going to mention the fact, in general, it's been a shit show of a year.
No, I'm trying to save my negativity for other podcasts.
But anyway.
But we had, Spider-Man, the PS4 video game came out, and absolutely love that. I'll put a shout out to him at the Rad Brad on Twitter and on YouTube. I watched his playthrough of the entire game and all the DLC content that's been released to this point and everything else, and I absolutely love the game. I can't play modern video games to save my life, so I don't mind watching playthroughs. I actually enjoy doing it. So we had that. Because of that, we've got this new event that Marvel's doing, Spider-Geddon, which is a continuation of the event previously, a couple of years ago, Spider-Verse in the Marvel Comics. So the main reason why we're doing this, other than to celebrate Spider-Man and for me to go back and actually see the original story that Stan and Steve came up with, is that we're going to be covering the Spider-Verse comics at some point next year here inside the Pull Bag. And I wanted to see what the beginning was of it. And just kind of curious and whatever else and all that good stuff. And the other cool thing, I'll have to find this, because of the game and everything else associated with that, the fact that the comic character from the game, let's just call him White Spider, people who played the game will know what that means, he is getting his own comic.
He gets a shout out in Spider-Verse as well, which was nice and unexpected. I wasn't sure if they were going to have time to include anything from it.
Right. But reported back on the 17th of December, Marvel's Spider-Man gets official comic spin-off. The Marvel Spider-Man game is getting its own comic series with the characters from the PlayStation 4 exclusive returning to the hero's roots. Marvel announced the new comic series called Marvel Spider-Man City of War on Monday and said the comic would feature the same characters and stories set up in the game that was released. Guess who's going to be writing it?
Yeah, so it's our old friend from some of our other reviews, Dennis Hopeless.
One of the more recent reviews, the WWE franchise, Dennis Hopeless is going to be writing this series, and the art is going to be done by Michelle Bandini.
Yeah, and I mean, good for Dennis, because
absolutely
we've enjoyed his other work, and Spider-Man is obviously pretty high profile. And hopefully people who played the games will be interested in the comics. I would assume so, but
yeah, I would assume
seeing the story from it continue.
Yeah, absolutely. And who knows? I'm sure the game has made more than enough money to get obviously a sequel. Things like that. But so we have Amazing Fantasy 15 here. I think for me, going back to this, what I was kind of worried about is kind of what I worried about going back and looking at the original Marvel US run for Transformers, where that really bled blue, black, red, white. And I'm not a fan of that original Marvel Transformers run comic style of art and coloring. I was not sure what this was going to do, but surprisingly, I really enjoyed this art in here. This is the first time I've ever seen, in an actual comic book, Steve Ditko's art. I've seen, prints of it and things like that and whatever, but I've never actually seen a full comic book that the man did until now.
So keeping in mind that there's been a bunch of versions and reprints of this, and it's been touched up, but even if you find a version that is not touched up, it has held up astoundingly well. So I don't even know where to begin. So it's all iconic imagery. I think at one point or another, people have seen every single panel of these books. It's been reprinted, it's been redone, it's been in various forms of media, but people have seen it, and it all holds up well. The entire thing holds up well. The story, the art, there's no aspect of it that hasn't withstood the test of time, which is one of the reasons why the character's still around after 50 some odd years.
Mm-hmm. And maybe it's because the version that I have is remastered that I'll have to look online later. I should have done it before the recording, but maybe it's because it is remastered that I enjoy it more. Because I'm a modern comic reader. We've only really gone back to older stuff every now and then on the pull bag. That was a couple of years ago when we did like Captain America, Man Lost in Time, and Old Man Logan, and things like that. Honestly, for me, and I'm just being honest about this, if it's before the year 2000, most likely, it's not for me. Sadly, we've covered things that are, from before that time, but I like the modern stuff. I don't know. So Amazing Fantasy, it's actually very short.
Yeah, well, so Amazing Fantasy were essentially collections of 5-page stories that Stan and Steve did, and just they were looking for places to put them and couldn't necessarily find places to to have them printed. Mm-hmm. And yeah, it just got cranked out in the final issue of Amazing Fantasy. And now Amazing Fantasy continued many, many years later, but I'm just going to consider the original run here.
Yeah. Yeah. The Spider-Man story that debuted in Amazing Fantasy 15 is 13 pages.
Yeah. Which I think made it the longest story in Amazing Fantasy's run.
Yeah.
And definitely the most important, by the way.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, you're absolutely right. I don't know what the page counts were like when, the olden days of comics, but I know nowadays, usually if you get a 20 or 22 page story, you usually have at least 5 or 6 ads in there if you're buying a print comic. Marvel and DC, or more so DC than Marvel, notorious for sprinkling ads throughout the story. But I mean, the story is, if anyone's seen the 2002 Spider-Man movie, obviously, the Green Goblin notwithstanding, the origins of how Peter got the spider bite and whatever else are virtually the same. I like how they have 2 parts to the story in this. They basically they sit there and say, at least in this version of it, part 2, and it's basically Peter not stopping the guy, the robber, and he's going through the wrestling and everything else, and then Uncle Ben, becomes Rice. Oops, sorry.
Yeah, spoiler alert, Uncle Ben dies.
But when I did go through this, I did enjoy reading it. I think it's really cool. Also included in this are 2 other stories. Amazing Spider-Man number 1 from 1963, and there's something else in this as well. I think it's the one where he fights the chameleon for the first time, maybe. I'll say this right now, I did not really read the chameleon story. I was mainly focused on the origin debut of Spider-Man. So Spider-Man number 1, basically this is where Spider-Man Unlimited in 1999 got their "let's send John Jameson into space" thing. because part of this is Spider-Man trying to save John Jameson's shuttle from crash landing.
Yeah, that's right. No, that's right, but I mean...
Yeah.
So there are aspects of these issues that haven't held up all that well. I mean, you mentioned the Chameleon storyline, although that's still pretty iconic, but
yeah,
you mentioned it too. That's not what people remember.
No, like the Chameleon's an okay villain, but I would rather have seen like the first time Spider-Man and Dr. Octopus had met. Or something like I'll be completely honest, folks. I don't see this Chameleon's, Spider-Man and the Chameleon story as a part of Amazing Fantasy 15. And at the end of Spider-Man #1, it even says "the end" as Peter's sitting there reading the paper without May. So that to me is the end of the original Spider-Man origin, and this Chameleon story is from something else.
And then, the Jamesons, and it's, it would be issue 2 that they introduced Chameleon. More, we had Vulture, Tinkerer, and that's also when Peter got a job and started working for Daily Bugle. Doc Ock wouldn't debut until the third one around a year later in 63. But yeah, so Spider-Man is pretty much just as iconic. By the way, Norman Osborn wouldn't even appear until the 23rd issue of the series, but Spider-Man's villains are nearly as iconic as Spider-Man himself. So it's interesting that really none of the ones... I don't know. Is Lizard's is Chameleon that? Is he one of the more iconic ones? I don't know.
No, he's not. He's not. Okay, so Chameleon is on the level of like.
He's on the B team, kind of, and he hasn't appeared in film really.
Yeah, he hasn't appeared in film at all. The only time I found Chameleon partly compelling is in the John... I'm going to get his name wrong, and I interviewed the guy. In the John Semper Jr. 94 Spider-Man cartoon, that was the only time I found that character somewhat compelling, because they gave him a backstory of being Red Skull's son or whatever. Some sort of whatever. I've never really latched on a Chameleon. And you look at Spider-Man. His rogues gallery is almost as enormous as Batman's. Like we've already said. Doc Ock, Green Goblin, Hobgoblin. We all know that Daredevil is just renting out Kingpin because he's originally Spider-Man's villain.
Which was nice to have him in Into the Spider-Verse as well. First time he's appeared with Spider-Man on screen.
Yeah.
Well, on the big screen, I mean.
Yeah. There's only a few select heroes where you look at them and you're like, who the hell's in that guy or girl's rogues gallery? Like, most of the superheroes that we know and that we grew up with, I've already said Spider-Man, Batman, Superman,
So Spider-Man's origin is it's one that we don't even have to really talk about what it was and how it happened or anything like that. People already know. And one of the things that this was a reminder of, and like I said before, this is really timely for me because I just saw Into the Spider-Verse, and one of the things that strikes me in both is the fact that Peter, one of the reasons Spider-Man's endured is because his origin, it could be anybody, which was the entire point of the origin of Miles Morales that Bendis wanted to get across.
Right.
And Miles' origin is very similar to Peter's, and deliberately so. And like I said before, it was used really well. But the thing with Peter Parker is, unlike the other, whenever you talk about the kind of trinity of comics, it's Spider-Man, Batman, Superman. Maybe that's changed now. I think you could put an argument that for a lot of people it ends up being Spider-Man, Batman, and quite possibly Iron Man now, but whatever, that's a discussion for another day. In any case, you look at each of their origins. So Batman has similar tragedy to Spider-Man. He loses family members, but the difference is Peter Parker's an everyman. Everybody has something in common with him. Peter was an awkward teenager, and he was picked on. He wasn't the popular kid in school, that kind of thing. Whereas Bruce is a rich guy, which most of us, and probably most of the people listening, might have trouble empathizing with.
Well, okay, but not really. Like, if you look at Bruce as a kid, sure, he's a rich kid, but he's not a rich kid like Richie Rich, or...
No, but he's a rich kid with a butler, and...
But his parents got murdered. I mean, come on. Like,
yeah, there's that. That's the tragic aspect, but he's not an everyman in the same way Peter is.
That's true.
And Superman is similarly. Superman's an immigrant story of somebody being out of place or feeling out of place,
right.
And he's got to hide who he truly is from everybody. Which again, there's an awful lot of people who can empathize with that. But the other aspect is, Superman is, well, he's Superman. I mean, he is capable of things nobody else is. So again, not quite the same as Peter before he's bitten by the spider. He very much, in the vein of a lot of the other Stan Lee characters, is a normal person. He's the average Joe in a lot of ways who is reading comics.
Yep.
And that's another reason why it's held up so well. He created a character that anybody can see themselves as or want to see themselves as. And,
absolutely.
And the fact that origin can be redone so similarly with Miles Morales, and really a lot of the other Spider-Verse characters have similar backstories to them. Right. And the fact that all of these characters were pulled off and all of these characters have been accepted openly, to me feels like yet another sign that they managed to create something really timeless with these 2 issues and with the origin of Spider-Man.
Absolutely, they did. And again, it's Stan Lee and Steve Ditko. It's 2 of the 3 major Marvel heads. Obviously, Kirby is the 3rd. Are we going to be covering more Stan and Steve stuff? I don't know. But
well, you talked about it before we started, that... So the whole concept of the Spider-Verse is that there are different decisions that branch off into different pathways or different universes, alternate dimensions, etc., etc. Maybe there's a dimension where Amazing Fantasy 15 didn't happen, but if it didn't, all of comics would be completely different. No matter what you do, when you're talking about comics, you're very much discussing / referencing stuff like these issues because comics probably wouldn't exist or wouldn't be in the same format.
Yeah.
Without these 2 issues and without Stan Lee and Steve Ditko. And there are certainly others on that list who influenced everything so heavily that we are where we are.
We would be in a completely different world, folks, if Stan Lee had not come up with Spider-Man.
And these are two issues that, so I talked about it before we went on, but we normally kind of give review scores. It seems real silly to give a review score to something that is responsible for so much of the rest of the medium and really all of pop culture.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I was never, like, after I read the Amazing Fantasy story, I'm like, there's no way we can rate this because it's
Amazing Fantasy 15 and it's the Amazing Spider-Man #1.
And it's the beginning of the next, whatever, 4, 5, 6, 7 decades of our lives. I mean...
And the future. So 100 years from now, these two issues are going to be reprinted again.
Oh, of course.
And they'll continue to be reprinted. And a lot of that is because of... It's not nostalgia. It's because there's very much a timeless classic. So you're reading these for the first time. So it's not a nostalgia trip for you.
Oh, no, it's not.
And so when you say you enjoy them, it's not because you...
It's not because I grew up with them.
And it brings up fuzzy memories.
No.
You enjoy them because it's a good story that still works today. And you look at all of the origins that have changed. So one of my favorite characters, the Punisher, has had to have his origin changed just because there's a date on it. But in the end, his origin, the origin of something bad happening, tragedy, that kind of thing's been reused 100 different times with 100 different characters. But the other aspect has had to be changed because of time. This is one that will never get changed. It can happen any time. Well, I guess unless we accidentally or deliberately exterminate spiders as a race.
Yeah, true.
I guess then we might have to change it.
You know, like I read when I read the Comixology description, that it has been remastered on the Comixology single issue version that I bought for $2. It might get remastered again. Like you've said, it might get reprinted again in some massive spot. The point is, folks, we were not going back to this. I was not going back to this. I was coming to this. I was, over my entire lifetime, over the last 38 and a half, almost 39 years, I've seen so many other versions of Spider-Man. And everything that's been going on with Spider-Man this year, I wanted to see where it started. I wanted to see Stan Lee and Steve Ditko for the first time in the beginning. And remastered or not, I loved it. I thought it was great. Are there a few things in the story of Amazing Fantasy that I most definitely think are of that time? Yeah, absolutely. But the whole point for me going back, that's like me going back to 2012 or 2014 and reading the new Marvel or the Marvel Now Iron Man series, which we will eventually do, kind of thing. That's like me going back there and saying, oh, well, that doesn't matter for 2018. No, you put it in the context that it was meant to be in. You know, and that's how I approached reading Amazing Fantasy 15 was, this happened 56 years ago. This was published. That's 5, almost 6 decades old. And it's a good, cool, everyman story. It's an interesting everyman story. It's about the kid who got bit by the radioactive spider, and he actually learns how to use his powers. He just doesn't, get bit by the spider and whoop. Like, we had the whole thing in here with him building the web shooters. There's no organic web shooters. It's not part of the damn mutation. I understand they had to do that for the time in 2002, but still. Peter Parker is this, teenage genius. And I think with Stan's writing and Steve's amazing art, they gave us They gave everyone back then what they needed and what they wanted. And that led to where we are today, with people finding a way to latch on to this character in any form, whether it's comic, movie, television, animation, hell, even music. I mean, I'm a huge soundtrack nerd, and as soon as I realized that the Spider-Man PS4 video game score was on Spotify, I immediately grabbed that playlist. You know, kind of a thing. So, going back and looking at this, or for me, looking at this in the first time, just going back all those years ago to look at it, wow.
It's, I don't really have much more to add after the fact that after all that and everything else, it's timeless. There's a number of different ways to get a hold of it. I think it's worth reading for anybody. Obviously, it's pretty much required reading for comic books in general. There's no reason not to. It's held up perfectly well. You can read it today and get pretty much the same feelings, I imagine, somebody who picked this up in August 1962 would feel.
Absolutely.
It's interesting that things are split up. Like, most people, I think, have forgotten that not everything Spider-Man and everything that made him a hero and made him Spider-Man happened in that initial issue of 13 pages. But, combined, these two, he's Spider-Man by the end of The Amazing Spider-Man #1. And all of the things, really, that he's known for, minus the villains, are all in place by the end of that issue.
Absolutely. The web swinging, J. Jonah Jameson, the wall crawling, the fact that he's going to, he goes out to the wrestling thing to make money to try to help Aunt May, and obviously that,
There's no Bonesaw. It's the only real disappointment.
Yeah.
If we could somehow retcon and retroactively put Macho Man Randy Savage there, maybe that would improve. No, I'm just kidding. But
Bonesaw isn't ready. I think Bonesaw would be ready for Oscar.
That's another podcast.
Yeah, we're getting off topic. Amazing Fantasy 15, folks. If you've never read it, go back, read it. Same thing with Amazing Spider-Man #1 from 1963. Go back, read these issues. See where Stan Lee and Steve Ditko
basically where it all started.
Yeah. I mean, see where Spider-Man's true origins began.
And again, it's really timely. I recommend it before, if you can, catch it before going to see, read it before going to see Into the Spider-Verse. And watch they use so much imagery from those panels in these comics, in that movie, and obviously deliberately so. You're talking about books that inspired probably every single person that worked on that movie, and have worked on so many others that it's just go read it.
Yep, go read it. Coming up on the pull bag will be our final episode of 2015.
I meant 2018. Wow, I just went 3 years in the past.
Unless they get their tickets punched by their friendly neighborhood Spider-Man.
Steve Megatron's going to join me as we talk about the Power Rangers original graphic novel, Soul of the Dragon. So that'll be episode 335. That's coming up on New Year's Eve, or it might actually be January 2nd. It might be the first episode of the 2019. I don't know. My plan was to have it be the last episode of the year. This might be the last episode of the year. Who knows? But Soul of the Dragon, Power Rangers original graphic novel written by Kyle Higgins, will be the next episode of The Pullbag. Where can the people reach you online, sir?
At Nightbeat. Talk to me about it at Nightbeat on Twitter. Talk to me about Into the Spider-Verse. I love it. That's all I think about.
I am at TFG and Mike on Twitter. Follow at The Pullbag on Twitter, at Geekcast Radio on Twitter as well. Go to geekcastradio.com. We're going to be having an all brand new website coming next year, so that's going to be cool and interesting and fun. Steve and I have been working on that nonstop. Steve has been breaking his back to get the new website up and going and everything else. Make your great escape into comics, and we will catch you next time here inside The Pullbag.
New York City. If only everything down there was really as peaceful as it looks from up here.
You've just heard the latest episode of The Pullbag, the GCRN's first comic review and discussion podcast. There are several ways to get in touch with us and leave feedback for the show. You can visit the website, geekcastradio.com, where you can comment on the episode and all of our different podcasts. You can rate and leave a review for the show on iTunes. Be sure to leave us feedback. Become a fan of us on Facebook, facebook.com/thepullbag. Send us an email, feedback at geekcastradio.com. Follow us on Twitter at thepullbag and at geekcastradio. So until next time, make your great escape into comics and unleash the geek in you.